Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. A huge NFL weekend will carry us in what's been a quiet week in the world of sports, but have no fear. I'll still take what's out there and deliver another entertaining hour of sports talk, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And before I begin, I have to send out a special birthday shout out to my son, Kevin Durant. No, not Kevin Durant. He's not my son. Justin Verlander, Christian Okoye, Andy Moog. Look them up. Those players wore the number 35, which is what my son turned today on this day, 1990, when he was born. So happy birthday, Andre. May you have many, many more. We'll speak later on today. I love you, kid. Hope you're doing well. And once again, happy birthday to my one and only, my son, Andre. So now let's turn our attention, as the NFL is front and center with what's going on in the sports world. And all I have to say is this upcoming weekend, which arguably, and maybe not even to a certain degree, is the best NFL weekend of the year. Of course, you have the 2-game Saturday, the 2-game Sunday. And when we take a look at the landscape here with the National Football League, this to me is the last weekend of the NFL season. And people are going to say, wait, JAYREELZ, what are you talking about? How is this the last weekend when you still have championship weekend, which is next weekend, and then 2 weeks after that is the Super Bowl? Well, championship weekend is almost the curtain going down on the NFL season. It's a day that you could do whatever errands, or at least get your day started to get yourself on track to either go food shopping or maybe just lounge around, who knows, and wait till 3 p.m., where the NFC will be the first game, and then the AFC Championship game will follow after that. And the Super Bowl is a holiday unto itself, but even championship weekend for me is just a day where it pretty much culminates in what lies ahead for what is, in essence, the biggest sporting event of the year, the unofficial holiday that is Super Bowl Sunday. So I look at Divisional Playoff weekend as it being, to me, in my eyes, the final NFL weekend of the year. And people could argue that. People could say, JAYREELZ, you're nuts, you're off your rocker because championship weekend is special. Of course, that's where we're going to find out who's going to represent the Super Bowl. And I get that, and that's fine. But to me, it's almost as if you could start to frown and really have the sun set on what will be the penultimate weekend of the NFL season when you have that and the Super Bowl. But again, I can't emphasize it anymore. Once you get past this weekend, championship weekend is almost like, all right. It still is, I get it, an NFL weekend technically. But because now that you narrow it down to the Final Four and just those 2 games exist, it's not as if where you have a long weekend of games. Forget about the regular season. That's unto itself. But when you look at Wild Card Weekend, the scenario of the 2-game Saturday, 3 Sunday, and then the 1 Monday night, which I'll get to in a second, and then you have the 4 games this coming weekend, championship weekend is just kind of like, all right, well, we're going to get to watch these games to see who's going to play in the Super Bowl, but it just doesn't have that feel of, all right, wall-to-wall football, start to finish from 1 o'clock to 11, or in a case where you have a 4:30 and 8 o'clock game, yes, you'll have that, of course, tomorrow, or I should say Saturday, as well as into Sunday, but championship weekend is 3 and it's 6:30, and that's it. So that's what you have there with the divisional playoff. And of course, I'm going to unpack the storylines in just a moment, but I want to touch on the game Monday night where the Vikings, and to me, the story is more about them than the Rams. I hate to say it. Now, granted that I underestimated the power of what had taken place in Southern California. As we all know by now, the fires that destroyed the Pacific Palisades and the recovery efforts that are ongoing and have been ongoing and certainly taking place as I speak. But for the Rams to come out like gangbusters and put on the performance that they did, and 9 sacks on Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold looked like a mere mortal, not only just the game there on Monday night, but even the week before in Detroit where they lost 31-9. And to think that this team had won 14 games in the regular season. The team had its best record since the 98 team, which, as we all know, was one of the more brutal championship losses that you've ever seen. 15-1, they had a 7-point lead. It could have been a 10-point lead with about 2.5 minutes remaining, where Gary Anderson, their field goal kicker, who hadn't missed a field goal all year, goes wide right, and then the Falcons go down, tie the game, and then win in overtime. But for now, all the uncertainty going into this offseason with Sam Darnold, whether or not they're going to franchise him, whether or not you're going to bring him back. You do have J.J. McCarthy, the guy you drafted from Michigan, waiting in the wings, coming back from injury. And I get it. They'll probably franchise him and keep him for one more year. You're going to have to pay him $45 million in the process. But maybe have a year where McCarthy gets groomed under Darnold. And then after that 1 year, you could say sayonara. And maybe Darnold has another killer regular season so he can maybe get that big contract after next year. But with all that being said, the Vikings, a bitter ending to their season, and it kind of reminded me of their season 2 years ago when they were 13-4, and yes, they won a lot of close games and all those margins of victory where it was one score and a lot of come from behind games, especially that one right before Christmas when they were down 33-0, I believe, to the Colts, and they came back and won that game. And as that was, they hosted a wild card game against the Giants, and we know what the end result was that. And then here it was, they had to go on the road, mind you, to Arizona because of everything that had happened in LA. So for the Vikings to really not even get off the bus and into the locker room, onto the field, I think the plane hadn't even landed yet, or maybe they're still on the tarmac, as the real Viking team did not show up there in Glendale on Monday night. And it's just a terrible way to end their season. I mean, what more can you say for a Viking team that, think about it, prior to them losing that game, they were on the verge of possibly getting a 1 seed in the NFC, and now they're home and have to mull this over for the rest of the winter into spring and obviously training camp before the season starts in September. And I get it. I'm not putting a lot of credit on the Rams. You got to give them all the credit in the world with everything that had transpired there in Southern California, and for them to rally the troops. I had heard that Michael Bidwell, the owner of the Cardinals, offered his jet to fly the Rams out to Arizona. Now, mind you, it's only a 45-minute plane ride. It's not as if they were going 2-3 hours east. But for Bidwell to offer that goodwill to a division opponent, I might add, and a division rival, maybe that's a little bit too strong, but they certainly are a division opponent. And to have them set up there prior to the game on Monday night was certainly a very good job by Bidwell. And the Rams, what more can you say about their performance? I mean, they just literally blitzed the Vikings out of that stadium, and with everything that was cast upon them, and I'm sure a city that was looking to have some solace in midst of just the destruction and the loss of life for that matter, for 3+ hours, I'm sure it gave the residents of LA and the surrounding area something to at least smile about as the Rams get the wild card win and now move on to play the Philadelphia Eagles there Sunday at 3 o'clock. And now as I get to the storylines of the weekend, and to me the theme is quest. No, not a Tribe Called Quest, but a quest. Because a lot of these storylines happen to fall under the line of that word. And the first one has to be right off the bat with the two teams that had byes, now that are going to be reintroduced here into our consciousness for the weekend. And the first one has to be the Kansas City Chiefs, their quest for a three-peat. And we talked about this during the NFL preview back in early September. And here they are. The NFL's best record. They've won back-to-back Super Bowls, as we know. And now for all of the, I won't go as far as saying flaws, but for some of the Houdini acts that they've had throughout the course of the regular year, and yes, they may have gotten a lot of calls along the way by the officials, but they do stand here with a 15-2 record. Obviously, a 1 seed in the AFC, where the Super Bowl path for the Texans as well as the Ravens and or Bills, whomever wins that game, will have to go through Arrowhead, especially if the Chiefs, in which we would expect, beat the Texans along the way. Their quest for immortality. And the reason why I say that is because there has not been a team in the Super Bowl era who has won 3 straight Super Bowls. We've had a lot of teams win 2 straight, as we know, but they've never been able to get that third. Although, if you want to lump the Packers into that mix, now, mind you, they won an NFL championship back in 1965, but in 66, 67, when the Super Bowl era had begun, they both won Super Bowl 1 and 2, beating the Chiefs and Raiders in the process. So yes, they did win 3 straight championships, technically, but not 3 Super Bowl championships. And this is what the Chiefs are going for. And their quest to do that, I'm sure they are chomping at the bit. I'm sure they're salivating. I'm sure there are a lot of haters out there that don't want to see it. Me personally, of course, just like everybody else, I have Chief fatigue. But if they do get to the dance, and as much as I may not want to root for them, especially if they go up against the Lions, and that's going to be the second thing I'll talk about in a minute. If they go up against the Lions, how can you not want to root for the Lions to win a Super Bowl? But again, we're talking about immortality. We're talking about history. Does this make the Chiefs the greatest team of all time with a 15-2 record? And if they run the table the rest of the way, it's a bit of a stretch, because now you're talking about those aforementioned Packer teams. You're talking about the Steeler teams of the 70s. You're talking about the Niner teams of the 80s, the Cowboy teams of the 90s, and whatever Patriot dynasty you want to talk about, whether it was the 2000s or even in the teens. You could certainly argue that those teams are better than the Chiefs team. But the one thing the Chiefs can say, if they do seal the deal, is that those dynasties of the past do not have what the Chiefs will have if they are the last team standing, and if Patrick Mahomes is raising that trophy over his head, as well as you would think a Super Bowl MVP, then they could certainly be part of that discussion and that argument of one of the best teams of all time. And certainly 3 in a row will stamp themselves as a dynasty, and not winning 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years or winning back-to-back as we've seen here over the last 2 years. If you're going to win 3 straight, then you will stamp yourself as a dynasty. So that's storyline number 1. Number 2 are the Lions and their quest to not only reach their first Super Bowl, but to win it. We saw it happen last year. Their dream of reaching a Super Bowl died in San Francisco or Santa Clara there against the Niners, and we know about the foibles of Dan Campbell, the head coach, and what transpired throughout the course of that game. But now it's all in front of them. 1 seed, the road to New Orleans goes through the Motor City, and they have an interesting test coming up here with the young Commander team led by their rookie quarterback, Jaden Daniels, but it is all set up for them. There is literally no excuses for this Lion team, as well as they played all year. A big winning streak in the middle of the year. Yes, they did lose to the Buffalo Bills there, sandwiched with the loss to Tampa early on. You got to wonder whether or not that they're relieved that they're not facing the Buccaneers here, considering they beat them earlier this year. They gave them all they could handle there last year in the divisional round, but obviously that's moot at this point. But for Dan Campbell, Jared Goff, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, who are hot coaching commodities right now, the offensive and defensive coordinators of the Lions, this is it. This is probably the best shot they're ever going to get. And you can't look ahead, even with the core as it is right now. And we know that their defense has been decimated by injuries, but still, this is their time to shine and their time to get to New Orleans for the first time in their franchise's history. So their quest to get to that point, and I understand getting there is half the job. Winning it is everything. And for the Lions to get that opportunity to have themselves play those 2 home games. So if they do beat Washington, obviously they'll host the winner of the Ram-Eagle game. And then if they're able to win that and become NFC champions, the next step would be New Orleans against the AFC representative. And it's all right in front of them, like I mentioned. So to me, that is storyline number 2. The third storyline, and this is an easy one, and this would be number 1 if it wasn't for the other 2, because KC, as I mentioned, chasing history, the Lions in their own right as a franchise chasing history as well. But for this duo that's going to take place Sunday night in Orchard Park, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. And for each of those guys, and I guess that's 3A and 3B. For Lamar, we already know what his story is, so I'm not going to belabor it for 5 minutes straight. Lamar, he's been to a championship game, as we know, last year, but he's not been able to win the big game. And this game right now is big because he's going up against a counterpart that he's literally head-to-head for the MVP of the regular season. And for Lamar Jackson, he's already won 2 MVPs. He's actually the reigning MVP, as we know. And even if he were to win this game, and let's say he puts up big numbers, everybody could look to Lamar saying this could be his time. But he would still have to get one more mountain to climb because we would think that when it's all said and done, he'll have to go to Arrowhead to slay that dragon. Because he has not beaten the Chiefs, as we know. Lost to them last year in Baltimore, 17-10, where he did not perform well. And even if he was to win this game, and like I said, put up somewhere 20 of 26 for 275 yards, throw 3 touchdowns and rush for a touchdown, and maybe have a game-winning drive in the process, and people will think that Lamar Jackson has arrived. He is not. Because similar to the Lions case, he has to get to a Super Bowl now. It's not a matter of beating the Bills, and it's not a matter of going toe-to-toe to Mahomes and falling short. He has to get to the big dance. He already has 2 MVPs on his mantle. And if he ends up getting a third and not reaches a Super Bowl, and he'll be in lofty company in the process, but he has to get to the dance and win it. That's all there is to it if you're Lamar Jackson. And if you're Josh Allen, he's been down this road before. No, not the MVP road, but he has played in this divisional round for the 3rd year in a row. He's going to have an opportunity to see if they could come away with the victory, as he didn't do 2 years ago against Cincinnati, as he didn't do last year against the Kansas City Chiefs. And then 3 years prior to that divisional playoff game in Arrowhead, where it was a classic and he was valiant in what was a crushing loss for the Chiefs. But even for he has to get to an AFC Championship game, which he hasn't done in 4 years. And which will ironically be, if that's the case, in all likelihood, back at Arrowhead, where 4 years ago they had a 9-0 lead before it fell apart, and that's where Kansas City took off and went to a Super Bowl. And for Josh Allen, again, another home game in his building, another divisional playoff game in his building, maybe the 3rd time's the charm, who knows? But they have to get to a championship game, and you would think that they have to get to a Super Bowl, considering that Allen, and for all that he's done this year, and I think he's the MVP, if you ask me, and I get it. If Lamar Jackson were to win, I'm certainly not going to be upset or start slamming books or be highly upset, because he is deserving to be an MVP. Just look at the numbers. He's put up better numbers this year than even last year, where he won the MVP, and 5 years ago when he won his first one. So if he were to win, then listen, I cannot argue any which way, shape, form possible. But the reason why I think Josh Allen is the MVP is because he doesn't have Derrick Henry in his backfield, and he doesn't have a borderline all-pro tight end in the one Mark Andrews, and he has been a perennial Pro Bowler. And I get it, everybody gets into the Pro Bowl in this day and age, but he does have more weapons on his team than Josh Allen has on his. And if you were to extract Josh Allen from the Bills, the same for Lamar Jackson, you could argue that Allen is more valuable to Buffalo than Lamar is to Baltimore, because you still have you still have Derrick Henry, and you still have some weapons there offensively that whomever the backup is in Baltimore will at least be able to function. Not dissing James Cook or Dalton Kincaid or Dawson Knox or Keon Coleman, but those guys cannot match the offensive firepower that the Ravens have. So that's why I think Josh Allen is your regular season MVP. But for Allen, again, he's been down this road before, and now he's going to have to get over the hump to get back to a championship game, which he hasn't been to in 4 years. And again, maybe staring at him in another mano-a-mano epic battle is going to be the guy who he has beaten in the regular season, it seems, year in and year out, but is not beaten in January. So that's why Lamar and Josh Allen go hand in hand as far as the storyline into this postseason. And of course, their quest to get to a Super Bowl. And then also one other quest is the Philadelphia Eagles. their quest to get back to a Super Bowl and win it. We all know 2 years ago they lost to Patrick Mahomes there, I believe it was in Glendale. And for Jalen Hurts, for Nick Sirianni, for A.J. Brown, and even for Saquon Barkley, the dynamic running back, who I'm sure will get MVP votes in his own right, but will not win it this year. But for everything that has transpired, dating back to last year, 10-1, the collapse that they had at the end of the year, and then this year, getting off to a rather slow start at 2-2, and then Nick Sirianni joining at the fans there on the sideline, and maybe some just disruptive forces in that locker room, whether it's A.J. Brown not getting the ball and not being friends with Jalen Hurts, as said by Brandon Graham in a podcast, and having to mend those fences there. And even though from that point on, it's been all kumbaya and coconuts and palm trees, but can they get back to a Super Bowl and maybe even win it, especially when you have a dynamic running back and one Saquon Barkley, who was not part of that Super Bowl team 2 years ago. So that's another quest there to see whether or not Philly could get there, knowing that they have to beat the Rams first and maybe have a date in Detroit before they could even think about being NFC champions. And then an honorable mention, just to cap this all off as far as the quest goes, a head coach and a rookie. The head coach being Sean McVay and the rookie being Jaden Daniels. As far as the Sean McVay head coach, he's already been to 2 Super Bowls. As we know, he's already won one a few years ago against the Bengals. And for all of the tricks that he's been able to pull, the rabbit out of his hat, last year starting off 0-3, making it into the playoffs and losing a tough game in Detroit. This year starting 1-4, and here they are in a divisional round having to play at the Link in Philadelphia. Can he, with all of his wondrous head coaching talent, can he pull another inside straight? Can he get a royal flush? Can he upset the Eagles, who ran roughshod over them on that Sunday night game sometime 5-6 weeks ago? Is he able to get back to a championship game, similar to the 2 other times that he did so, whether it was in New Orleans with Jared Goff as his quarterback, or just a few years ago when they were able to beat the Niners in their building? So that's the quest for one Sean McVay as he tries to get to a 3rd Super Bowl. And then Jaden Daniels. Is the magic going to continue? Is he still going to be that cool, calm, collected guy, which is going to be a raucous building at Ford Field there on Saturday night, whether or not he's going to be able to withstand that pressure? And he's going in with house money. So it's not as if there's a ton of pressure on him to win this game. But can they compete? Can they be in the game in the 4th quarter to really make the Lion fan and even maybe the Lion players and coaches a little tight, a little nervous? And his quest to advance to an NFC championship game, and dare I even say, get to a Super Bowl, which would be a tremendous story for what that franchise has been through over the last 2 decades. So that is your storyline. A lot of juicy storylines to boot. But here's the sad part about this divisional playoff weekend. And I think it's going to be competitive, and I think you're going to have some fun games. But to me, it's one game, and there's everyone else. And thankfully, that one game is Sunday night, 6:30 in Buffalo. The other games, you can have duds when it's all said and done. And we'll start off with the games on Saturday and go in sequential order. Houston, Kansas City, we saw this rematch in the regular season just a month ago. And the Texans, what this game's going to boil down to is how much pressure are they going to be able to get on Patrick Mahomes. And as you already know, with a guy like Mahomes, I don't care if he still has that bum ankle, and I don't care what kind of maladies he may have as far as his physical health goes, but that guy has guts, he has, nerves of steel, and there isn't anything that you're going to do to fluster him. Unless the offensive line of the Chiefs is going to harken back to that Super Bowl performance against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, to me, the Texans have no shot. I'm sorry. Now, unless Joe Mixon is going to have a monster game where he's going to rush the ball for 30 yards and have 30 carries for 190 yards and 2 touchdowns, and they're going to eat the clock and keep that Kansas City Chief offense on the sidelines, this would be a monumental upset. And I don't know what the spread is. It's probably 7.5, 8.5, somewhere in that vicinity. I'm not saying that this is going to be a coast job for the Chiefs, but they know the Texans, and I would think that C.J. Stroud, who now has 2 playoff wins under his belt, both games at home, what he's going to be able to do to carry that into this game, whether or not he's going to play from in front or at least keep the Chief defense respected and keep them at bay. I can't see it. To me, this is not going to be a dominant game because the Chiefs have not been them dominant themselves in quite some time, and certainly not this year unless you're going to look at the game on Christmas against the Steelers, which is more an indictment on Pittsburgh than it is on the Chiefs. But how I look at it is that if you're not going to get a lot of pressure on Mahomes, and what I mean by pressure, you have to have constant pressure, not periodic, not sporadic, not for a quarter. You're going to have to be in his face. You're going to have to throw off his timing, throw off his rhythm, etc. And even then, that's not a guarantee for victory. So with that being said, I'm going to think that the Chiefs are going to win this game 27-19, similar to the game there last month where I believe they won 24-19. I can see the same blueprint. Watch them get out to an early lead. Yeah, they may keep it respectable, the Texans, but it's going to be too much Mahomes. He's going to make plays when he has to. And granted, there's no Tyreek Hill or Rashee Rice who's been out for the year or guys like that who obviously, or even a Travis Kelce in his heyday. He's going to be there to make his catches, and probably that 3rd and 4, he'll get those 7 yards. But I think it's going to be the Chiefs that will advance and get back to another AFC Championship game, which I believe will be the 7th straight when it's all said and done. So you have that there in the opening game. As far as the nightcap there on Saturday, Washington and Detroit, how I look at this game is, will the Commanders be in this game in the second half? Because I can see the Lions are going to come out flying, and they're going to have to withstand those first couple of drives there by the Lions and their offense. David Montgomery is going to be back in the lineup, so that's going to be a huge boost. And for the Commanders, how they're going to be able to thwart those first, we'll just say the first quarter, and be able to either be in the game or maybe keep it respectable to the point where it's 7-0 or 7-3. It's not 10-0 or 14-0 pretty much right out of the gate. And even though there's plenty of game left to be played and anything can happen, special teams, block punts, turnovers, things of that nature, stuff that you can't really predict and factor in when it comes to these predictions. But I would think that they'll still be fast and loose. Dan Quinn, who, as I mentioned on Monday, has a little bit of Dan Campbell in him as far as his gambling ideals when it comes to situations, 4th downs, things of that nature. So who knows? That could be a touche or mano-a-mano when it comes to which coach is going to maybe make that egregious error when it comes to either clock management or maybe going for it too soon. If it's a 4th and 3 at the, let's say, Lion 43-yard line, that we'll have to wait and see. But the Lions, they've built up everything. They've played from in front all year. They've gone down to the wire. So this wasn't a situation where they cruised to a 1 seed or they had such a big lead in the division where they didn't have to worry about having to deal with the Vikings or even the Packers for that matter. No, they had to play everybody up until week 18, week 18, game 17. So I would think that although the Commanders, they'll withstand a couple of punches here, and they may be heard from in this game, but I would think when the chips fall where they may, that the Lions will prevail. I think their offense is just too potent, and even though you have some weapons there on the Commanders side, whether it's the running back Brian Robinson, this is going to be a big game for him because he's going to try to do his best to keep that Lion offense on the sidelines. But for him, Terry McLaurin, guys like that, we are going to have to wait and see whether or not they're going to match offensive firepower with the Lions. And I don't think they're going to do so, considering this is the deep end of the pool for them. They haven't been this deep in the postseason in forever. And now they're going to have to match offensive wits against Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, that is a lot to ask for. So I think it's going to be Lions 30, Commanders 20 there in game number 2. For Sunday's games, now, the Rams, for everything that they did there on Monday night, and kudos to them and their coaching staff, etc. But to me, this is going to be a rough spot because for all of the emotions that were riding from that week leading up to that game, knowing that they had to play this game in Arizona, now they have a short week. They have to fly east, and we all know the time zones are very tricky when you're going east to west and west to east, especially this late in the year. And I get it, it's the playoffs, it's the divisional round. People are going to say, well, JAYREELZ, if they can't get up for this game, then they should look for another job or something else to get into. And I get that. But those are factors this time of year. And to know that they're going to play an Eagle team that defensively was fantastic there on Sunday against the Packers. Yes, their offense obviously sputtered and didn't have a lot of flow, as I mentioned on Monday's podcast. But now that the dust and the bugs and the cobwebs are off of the quarterback, Jalen Hurts, who obviously missed those final couple of weeks there with the concussion, now I think with maybe some whispers about, whether or not this offense is getting click, and thankfully they have Saquon Barkley to at least rush the ball, but as far as their passing game goes, how is that going to factor in now, even with a young Ram defensive line that's certainly on the come up? But I think this is a dangerous spot for the Rams because for the travel, the weather, even the emotion of having to come back from a short week and having to rally the troops, granted, now it's going to be even that much more heightened in a hostile environment. I think this is going to be a tough spot for the Rams. That's not to say they're going to get blown out. That's not to say that they don't have a veteran quarterback who knows his way around tough situations and hostile environments and things of that nature. But I think that the Eagle offense may get on track here as far as their passing game goes. And their defense was lights out there, although they lost a very big component in a one to Kobe Dean with a knee injury. So you're not going to see him throughout the rest of this postseason, which is a huge loss. And you cannot minimize that. But I think at the end of the day, the Eagles will prevail. I think they'll do just enough. Can the Rams go in there and pull off an upset? Of course they can. They have a very good coach and a coach that has an excellent track record. Again, trying to get back to a Super Bowl for the third time in his young career. But I think the Eagles with Saquon and I think with Hurts trying to show the world that he has shaken off whatever rust, dust, cobwebs, etc., as I mentioned, to get himself back on track and for them to win this game knowing that they have another game in their building. And yes, that we'll know whether or not that they'll either have to go to Detroit, and if the Commanders pull off a major upset, chances are they're going to say, we can have this game in our building and know that we won't even have to worry that if we just take care of our P's and Q's, we'll have an NFC Championship game in our building. That's why I like them, and I picked the score 28-17 Philadelphia. And before I even get to Baltimore-Buffalo, this is why I think that these three games that I mentioned could be duds. Kansas City and what they did to Houston last month, not to say it's going to be the same story this time around, but I certainly have a lot of confidence in them winning the game. I have confidence in Detroit for everything that I've mentioned, and the Commanders really going into a tough spot. And even though with the wonder boy genius of Sean McVay, but for all the emotions, the travel, etc., this could also be a tough spot, which could lead to three maybe not so competitive games. Now you get this one, which to me, this could be a classic. And how I look at it is this way. I think that the team who has the ball last is going to win the game. It's going to be that type of game. I'm sure the Bills are going to try to key on as much as they can to Derrick Henry, who had a monster game on that Sunday night there. What was it, week 4? And remember, he had that 89-yard touchdown right out of the gate. So I'm sure they're going to do their best to keep Derrick Henry at bay. And that's the thing. You pick your poison. If you're going to keep Derrick Henry at bay, that's where Lamar could go off. And that is a nightmare for any defensive coordinator, no matter who you are. But to me, what Buffalo's going to have to do in this game, it is going to be all on the shoulders of number 17. And I'm sure those are shoulders that he's willing to have his team on his back to carry them to a championship game. And I'm sure there's going to be a little bit in the back of his mind knowing that this is going to be for the MVP. Now, this game isn't because it's a regular season award and everybody who had voted, the vote is already in. But I'm sure there's going to be a little chip on the shoulder, and the same for Lamar for that matter, because more personally, because I don't think he's going to take it personal that Josh Allen's going to win an MVP, considering he already has to. This isn't a Nikola Jokic with Joel Embiid, I deserve the MVP over Jokic. Nothing like that. But for both of these guys, as I mentioned, trying to get over the hump, more so Josh Allen than Lamar in this case, because at least we've seen Lamar get to a championship game just last year. And yes, Josh Allen has been to a championship game, but that was 4 years ago. And one more time, people, I said it before, and one last time. This is the third time that they're going to host a divisional playoff game in his building. He is 0-2. Maybe the third time's a charm for him. Maybe this is the time for them to get over the hump. And that city that has been rabid, Bills Mafia, starving to get to a Super Bowl. And for Josh Allen, this is his time just as much as it is Lamar's. But I really, truly believe this is going to be a toe-to-toe, 15-round, knockdown, drag-down fight. And what it's going to boil down to is not only the team who has the ball last, but more importantly, who's going to make the costly mistake? Who's going to have that big fumble? Who's going to have that big interception? Or maybe the muff punt deep in someone's territory where that's going to shift the game. That's what this game is going to come down to, I believe. And for poetic justice, how would it be for the Bills to get to the next round, to finally win that divisional playoff game in their building? For them to just go off into the night and meet possibly the Kansas City Chiefs in an AFC Championship game, for Tyler Bass, who last year at 27-24 missed that field goal, went wide right, to the chagrin of Western New York, and now it could come down to his foot where the game is tied 28 up, and it's about, you name the time, 3 seconds, 13 seconds, or maybe not 13 because that's going to bring back bad memories for the Bills fan, but let's just say 28 seconds to go, and he makes the game-winning kick, and with the Ravens having no timeouts and not a prayer to get down the field to set themselves up for a game-time field goal, Buffalo 31, Baltimore 28. And as I wrap up the NFL segment, Mike McCarthy out as coach as the Dallas Cowboys, as you saw earlier this week. And is that a surprise? A little bit from this regard. Jerry Jones, if you recall, the week prior, did not grant permission to the Chicago Bears to interview Mike McCarthy for the head coaching job. So it made you think, if he wasn't going to grant the permission, okay, I guess they're going to try to hammer out a deal and work out something, which those were the reports that they weren't able to have a deal in tow. And I believe it was more the years than it was money. I think McCarthy wanted to have some stability, and Jerry Jones and the Jones family said, nah, not so fast. So if that's the case, I can understand them not wanting to grant permission, thinking that they were going to work out a deal. And maybe McCarthy said, this is what I want. And if you're not going to give me that, then I'm going to walk away. And sure enough, that's what happened. So I get it. You can't fault Jerry Jones there, even though to a certain extent, because maybe you wanted to come to an agreement. And I'm sure he did. But he was loyal to Wade Phillips and for Jason Garrett for years on end before they had a parting of the ways. And here's a guy, notwithstanding this year, who didn't have Dak Prescott for the last half of the season and did an admirable job, even though they were 8-9 and were under 500. Granted that regular season success did not translate into the postseason for the Cowboys, but Mike McCarthy at least was able to get to a divisional round 1 year. All right, too bad wild card losses in your building to San Francisco and Green Bay, but was 12-5 the previous 3 years. And even then, he wasn't loyal and decided, all right, fine. But now you have all this surfacing about Deion Sanders and how Jerry Jones has already spoken to Sanders and whether or not he's interested and maybe wants to hop on board to be the next Dallas Cowboy coach. Well, here's the problem I have with that, and this is twofold. Deion side and Mike McCarthy, and Jerry Jones' side. For Deion, you talked all about Colorado, my kickstand, this is where I'm at. And I understand that Shador and Travis Hunter and some of his players are going off into the NFL. And for Deion, who is now made Colorado a destination for players in the NIL world that we live in and transfer portals to go there. Now, is he all of a sudden reconsidering, thinking that Dallas Cowboys, America's team, the prestige, obviously he played for them, won a Super Bowl for them. Does he want to go there to coach and supervise guys who are going to be making 5 and 6 times more than what he's making, in particular Dak Prescott, of course, and guys he's going to have to deal with egos and attitudes, and we know Deion had the biggest one of all, especially during his playing days, and still to this day, Coach Prime, etc., and we get that, and he's earned that because he's always backed up what he's done on the field and even to a certain extent here as a coach. But for Deion, do you really want to now go to the NFL where it's a whole different beast, where you have to manage these personalities, where you have to really get in these players' faces and get their attention that you can do in college that you really can't do in the pros? Because the minute that you're going to be that disciplinarian or that guy is going to, maybe not with the cameras around, but you're going to grab him by the face mask, or in this day and age, you're going to grab him by the collar and say, son, we don't do that here. Or son, keep your head in the game, or whatever it is. And that's going to either get frowned upon or eye rolls or side eyes in the process. To me, I wouldn't do it no matter how much money. And Deion has plenty of money, so it's not even a thing about money, if you ask me. So, and now who can I tell Deion what to do and what not to do? If he wants a cowboy job, fine. But we understand loyalty in sports, whether it's the coaches, whether it's players, etc., there is none. But is he really fascinated by his job based on what he said just a month ago with the kickstand, and I'm not going anywhere, and Colorado's my home, and so on and so forth, whatever? For him to jump ship now, I would be disappointed if that was the case. Would I be shocked? No, but I'd be disappointed. And then for Jerry Jones' side, we know, speaking of ego, look in the Webster's dictionary, and the definition is a picture of his face right next to that word. And I don't have to get into Jerry and everything that he is the Cowboys in all facets of it. And my thing is that, is he desperate at 82 years of age? Is he at a point where maybe he could, dare I say, check his ego, put it to the side to have Deion now be the ringleader, so to speak, to know that he's going to be not only the head coach, but the mouthpiece of this team, and maybe step aside and not be that distraction to what has been, let's face it, almost 30 years of futility. And when I say futility, that means no championships, because obviously the Cowboys have had success and they have been to the playoffs and have won some games, but they have not been to a conference championship game since 1995. Since 2 days ago, there was a 30-year anniversary where they beat the Packers to go to the Super Bowl, and they beat the Steelers that year in Super Bowl 30. So, well, was that 96? So it was 29 years ago, because they won the Super Bowls in 95 season, but that date was 1996. So, but with that being said, is he willing to do that? And if you ask me, I don't think so. So, if I'm Deion, I'd stay away. And if I'm Jerry Jones, even though he may be willing to say, all right, I'll give the keys to Deion, but he's almost like, if you're watching on YouTube or on Spotify, he's like giving the keys, but then he's holding him back. He's like, giving the keys, oh, make sure you put gas in it. Here, son, here are the keys. Oh, make sure that you don't get into a car accident. That's how it's going to be. So, again, the three-ring circus that is the Dallas Cowboys, who knows where and what direction this is going to go. But if Deion and all the rumors and everything is going to just all of a sudden crop up and ends up being the coach, wow. I don't know what else to tell you, Cowboy fans, but that's what you have there. College football, we're not going to talk about till Monday. Notre Dame and Ohio State, will preview it then. So that's with the football. I know it took up most of the time because, let me tell you, people, from here on out, I got a couple of things that are on the docket, and that's it. NBA, what? I'm going to talk about Kyrie's return, where he was just awful in the game a couple of nights ago, and last night did not play in a game against Denver. So, all right, he's back. It was a back-to-back, so he didn't play in the game. He returned from that back injury, 5 games. We're still waiting for Luka to come back, which I believe he's still about, 2 weeks away, and that's to be evaluated. That's not for him to come back into the lineup, so something to think about there. Jalen Green beating Memphis the other day. We talked about that was an interesting matchup. The 2 and 3 seeds in the Western Conference tied his career high with 42 beating Memphis, as they right now are entrenched in that 2 seed in the Western Conference. And besides that, I mean, I don't have anything as far as the association goes. I mean, what more can I really even bring up? I know we could talk about LeBron's comments about how mental health-wise it's affected him, the fires, as far as, J.J. Redick losing his house in the process in the Pacific Palisades, and the impact, as I talked about before, with the Rams situation. I mean, it's terrible. It's sad. It's just awful. I mean, there's no other way to cut it. But is that a story? Is that something that I'm going to really unpack there with LeBron? I mean, we all know everybody's been going through that, especially in that part of the country. So there isn't really much else to discuss. There isn't a team that's been hot. There isn't a team that's been flying high other than the Rockets. There isn't a team that's been in a tailspin, unless you want me to include the Washington Wizards, who's lost 7 in a row. I mean, seriously? I mean, that's what you have with the NBA. Nothing else to unwrap, unpack, or uncover. I'm sorry. Now, as far as the schedule, let's see what's happening here over the course of the next few days in the association. Tonight, you have Cleveland and Oklahoma City. That's a rematch of last week's game where Cleveland outlasted the Thunder. So tonight is the rematch to see of the top 2 teams in the East and West with the best records in the sport. They'll go at it, so we'll certainly keep an eye on that as we head into the weekend and obviously when we reconvene on Monday. Then you have Houston and Sacramento. I know these Kings were a team that was riding high and flying with the winning streak that was snapped the other day. They had that 7-game winning streak where it came to a screeching halt when they lost to the Bucks there in Milwaukee. But other than that, in the association, you don't have much, as I mentioned. But as far as the schedule goes, you have 2 good games there tonight. Orlando at Boston tomorrow. Minnesota at New York. So you're going to have Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. For what that's worth, they'll get their first return. We saw Karl-Anthony Towns go back to Minnesota there, what was it, last month, I believe right after Christmas, and put up some big numbers against his former team. So you have that. You have a rematch of the NBA Final 2 years ago, Denver at Miami. And now who knows what's going to happen with this Jimmy Butler deal, because the 7-game suspension that was handed down by the team, that is up. So I guess they're going to put Butler on ice, or unless they're going to have him come back. I don't think that will be the case, but we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen with that saga down there in South Beach. But you have those 2 teams reconvening from their finals appearance 2 years ago. OKC at Dallas, Memphis at San Antonio, Brooklyn at LA. Did you see what happened last night in Intuit Dome where the Clippers handed a 59-point loss to the Brooklyn Nets, and at one point it was a 64-point deficit? Ugh. Not good to be a Brooklyn Net fan in this day and age. Atlanta at Boston Saturday. Cleveland, Minnesota, that's a good game there. Sunday, San Antonio at Miami. Denver, Orlando, so they make their trip to the Sunshine State there Friday and Sunday. Philly at Milwaukee. LA at LA. I believe it's the first time the Lakers are going to be at the Intuit Dome, so I get it. It's a regular season, meaningless game at this point, but be interesting to see how that turns out. If you're going to have a lot of Laker fans coming into the building, especially with the way that dome, if you haven't seen it, check it online. That dome is out of this world. It's almost SoFi light. SoFi Stadium, of course, where the Chargers and Rams play. That's what you have with the NBA there, and the same can be said for the National Hockey League. You do not have much going on the ice, unless you want me to get into Tristan Jarry, the goaltender from the Pittsburgh Penguins, who was released on waivers. Their starting goaltender, and now they're going to have a couple of others, their backups that will fill in. I know the Penguins have had a bad year, and I thought that was going to be the case. Even with Crosby signing that 2-year deal, they're an older team. Well, they have older players that they're banking on to have big years and to, for whatever reason, in the twilight of their careers, that being Evgeny Malkin, who's been out, Sidney Crosby, as we know, and Chris Letang, the defenseman, to go back in a time capsule to whether 2008, 2009, where they played in back-to-back Cup finals and they won in the 09 final, and then 2016-17 when they beat the San Jose Sharks and Nashville Predators, for them to have a renaissance here in pretty much what would be their last go-around, to have the same type of result of what they did 16 years ago or even 8, 9 years ago, the hockey god said, not on my watch. So, and I'm not to be harsh, but that's just the truth there. But with the National Hockey League, that's all you have. I mean, there's no other really big storylines or big games that had happened here over the course of these past 3 days. And as I take a look at their schedule, and I'll even pull up, I think there was one game of interest here over the last couple of days. And which one was it? Was it Edmonton? And I know Connor McDavid now tied with Jari Kurri for second most points in Edmonton Oilers history. Listen, are you going to jump up and down for that? I think not. And Edmonton did beat Minnesota there yesterday when McDavid had a big game. And that's where he tied Jari Kurri for second all-time in franchise history. But the games of note starting tonight, slim pickings, people. Tonight you have a slew of games, but nothing really. Edmonton and Colorado, maybe that's your big game. LA at Vancouver. Tomorrow, nothing to shake at there. Saturday, you have an ABC game this weekend. You don't even have one this weekend, huh? Wow. Anaheim at Florida. No, as they head down to South Florida there, or to the Sunshine State for a couple of games. I think then they'll play Tampa after that. But here it is. Saturday, which is always a big schedule. Pittsburgh at Washington, if you want to see Crosby Ovechkin for the millionth time, and obviously for the final few times here in their illustrious careers. Edmonton at Vancouver. Yeah, this schedule is from hunger. New York and Montreal, if you want an original 6. The schedule of forthcoming, why even bother? The NHL is just an eyesore. Sorry, Gary Bettman and company. That's just how it is. You do not have many games to rally around. Dallas or Colorado, I see here on Saturday. All right, that maybe you can look at. But other than that, you have slim pickings. All right, so now as I get off the hardwood and the ice, let me get to the batter's box with baseball just for one storyline, and that is the Japanese star pitcher Roki Sasaki, as he's narrowed it down to 3 teams that he wants to sign. And those 3 teams are the Dodgers, shocker, the Padres, okay, and the Toronto Blue Jays. And I'll go in order. Dodgers, to no surprise, obviously with Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Shohei Ohtani, he'll just slide right into that rotation if he does sign with the Dodgers. So that's number one. The Padres, you have an elder statesman from his country and a one Yu Darvish, and maybe he'd want to team up with him, knowing that they need a young pitcher. Where Joe Musgrove, he has Tommy John surgery. Who knows what his status is? Blake Snell been long gone by way of San Francisco and now to LA as he made his way around the NL West here over the last couple of years. And for Sasaki, maybe he wants to team up and maybe be that rival that the Padres are to the Dodgers, and how in the last couple of years they've had some very hotly contested postseasons. Does he want to do that? Is that in his DNA? Is that in his makeup? That would be fascinating. Or does he go north of the border to Toronto, which has a lot of money, and they could bring that international standpoint of what they were going to do to Shohei Ohtani, considering the Rogers team. Rogers Center is the name of the stadium as we know, but the Rogers, the communications group who owns the team, and obviously with the outreach that they have across the globe to have Sasaki be the poster child for not only Rogers Communications, but also for the team to spread out, and maybe they could use him as a guy on the front of the yearbook and media guide as a guy that is the pitcher of not only today, but of the future, 23 years of age, etc. Maybe that's the case. And for Sasaki, that'll have his own team. Now, mind you, they have a very good pitching staff with Jose Barrios and Kevin Gossman and the like. But for Sasaki, does he want to do one of 3 things? Does he want to have his own team and not have to be in the shadow of the Dodgers and even the Padres, playing in the shadow of the Dodgers in the process? And maybe he wants to go to San Diego, the warm weather, and say, to hell with it. I want to be the team that beats the Dodgers when in the regular season or come postseason time, to be able to be that guy and to be on the rise, considering that Yu Darvish is pretty much in the twilight of his career? Or do you say, if you can't beat him, join him and hook up with his fellow countrymen to be probably the third starter on the team, or maybe the fourth starter when you think about it? Because if Shohei, all systems go, is healthy, you would think he's probably going to be the starter for game number 1. Follow that by Blake Snell. Follow that by Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Follow that by Tyler Glasnow. And then you have Roki Sasaki. So could you imagine? And you would think they're going to go to a 6-man rotation because obviously, as we know, in Japan, they had the 6-man rotation. They give them the extra day. But think about those 5 pitchers. And if you want to bring in Bobby Miller, who I know is coming back from Tommy John, or even a guy like Dustin May, also coming back from Tommy John. But think about it. Your 5th guy in your rotation could be the number 1 prospect coming out of Japan in the one, Roki Sasaki. The rich may get richer here when it's all said and done, but all I'll say is that if Sasaki wants to be the man, go to Toronto. If he wants to beat the man, go to San Diego. And if he wants to join the men, go to LA. And that's probably the best way to encapsulate all that. Now let me break out the tennis racket and close out with the Australian Open. And you had a couple of upsets here in the early part of the week. I talked about Stefanos Tsitsipas losing there earlier this week, as you know. But you also had Andre Rublev lose to an 18-year-old Brazilian kid by the name of João Fonseca. So that was a big story there. Rublev, the 9th-ranked player in the world, lost in straight sets, I might add. So maybe Rublev had other thoughts on his mind or whatever is going on in his life. So Rublev out there, down under. And then you also had the runner-up last year on the women's side, Jinwen Zheng, lose to Laura Siegmund there, I believe in 3 sets, not in straight. So for Zheng, who was the 5th-ranked player in the world, and for her to bow down there in the second round, big upset on the women's side. But the story right now, and it's maybe going to start picking up some traction here, especially after a win against the 20th-ranked player in the world and a one, Karolina Muchova, is Naomi Osaka. Now, her next match is against an unknown to me in a one, Belinda Bencic. And let's see whether or not she's going to be able to beat her in the 3rd round, which will be tomorrow, which will then lead into the weekend. And if she happens to get into next week, that'll be a big story. And for Osaka, we know her trials and tribulations over the years, dealing with mental health, having a kid, not that that's trials and tribulations, but of course taking time away from the tennis court and having a family, as well as compounding that with the pressures of being young and being a superstar player and winning major tournaments, and of course having to deal with that internally and how that is externally to fans, to media, to the pressures, and having to reel it in and dial it back a little bit. And you have to wonder how she's feeling here, because if this does get some legs and she goes into next week, and mind you, it's Australia, and I don't know how the tennis media is, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot that is going to come from this if she does go into next week, which is fascinating. And not just the off-the-court stuff and the mental health. I mean, that's a story unto itself. But this is, to me, a bit of a redemption story. And if she does go into next week, how she's going to be able to handle that. And I hope for her, she goes deep into this tournament. And let's say, hey, let her win the whole thing. Not saying just let her win, you know what I mean? But that would be a story that would start off the 2025 sports calendar year as a big-time success. And I get it that tennis is not on everybody's radar, and I get it that tennis is for the real die-in-the-wool fan or the good tennis fan. It's not as if you're going to get the average sports fan, or let's say a guy that loves the NFL, NBA, baseball, that's following Naomi Osaka and what's happening down in Melbourne. Of course not. But if you're a kook like I am, and you're watching this from afar, and you see what she's done here as she's trying to make her way back, and she's played at Wimbledon and the U.S. Open last year and hasn't gotten far, hasn't gotten past the 3rd round or 2nd round, and all right, fine. But now she's in the 3rd round, and she's going up against an opponent that nobody really knows. Now, could she lose to Bencic? Of course she can. I mean, she is a tennis player, and she obviously is someone that has made it to this point, so you would think that she has a puncher's chance to win. But Osaka and her track record, and knowing that now here she is gaining some momentum here, whether or not she can make it into the weekend and obviously into next week, would be a fascinating story and one that I'm certainly going to pay attention to. And right now is the story of this tournament. Because what Carlos Alcaraz or what Novak Djokovic or what Jannik Sinner or Iga Swiatek or Coco Gauff or Jessica Pegula, I mean, they're done what they've had to do, win their matches in order to advance. But for Osaka, she right now is the story. And you know what? I'm here for it. I'm here for it, and congratulations. Let's just hope that she can continue success into the weekend and into next week. So come Monday, we can talk about it and see where the chips will fall at that time. That is it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books. As always, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in this wonderful world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, and review to the podcast. Come on, people. I need to increase the visibility. We need to get the word out. The JAYREELZ podcast, talking sports is what I love. Talking sports is what I do. Where else are you going to get all these sports, including tennis, in one podcast? Where else? I'm waiting, still waiting. That's why I got you covered in roughly an hour. So please, share it with the family, friend, foe, frenemy in your life. Take a screenshot on social, send it to me. I'll send it to the universe that's out there in the social media stratosphere that it is. So please do so. I would greatly appreciate it. Also, check out the YouTube channel. I put up a vlog there the other day. I didn't mention it on Monday's podcast, but check it out. I did a cold plunge, but not in the ocean. I put the ocean there. It looks better in the title, but in the bay here in the northeast section of the Bronx. So you definitely want to check that out. But the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, please subscribe. I've had some success there with increase of subscribers, but I'm still chugging along that little engine that could. So please go there and hit subscribe, leave a comment, etc. And also, if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the following on my socials at Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just the number, or the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, as you know, because whether you do or do not know, again, I'm born to do this. I'm built for this. I'm going 7 years strong come March 1st. And in the coming, I would say 2 weeks, there's going to be an announcement. So you're going to want to stay tuned because I have something epic brewing as far as that anniversary show, which will be lucky number 7. So you definitely want to stay tuned for what's going to lie ahead and listen to this podcast. Follow me on my socials, as I mentioned, and the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, because this event, if it does, and I shouldn't even say if, to put it out in the universe, when it comes into fruition, it is going to be epic. I promise you. So stay tuned. Keep in touch. Stay tuned to that dial because I will continue to always deliver the passion, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, analysis, praise, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ podcast, on the flip, baby.